Hi everyone, my name is Vineet and welcome to this short tutorial in which I will be explaining you how to integrate ISE with F5 so that you can provide a role-based access to various users in your environment to F5. Some users might have the requirement of getting admin access, some other from a development folks only might need read-only access. So if you have ICE in your environment and F5 and you're thinking how to integrate both of these using TACACS, I'm here to help. Let's get started. First and foremost thing which is important is you need to have admin access to F5 and ICE. In this video, I'm going to use F5 version 13.1 and ICE version 2.2. I'm mainly making this tutorial for administrators who work day in, day out with F5 and they want to give access to their infrastructure folks with various levels based on their roles. I've divided this tutorial in 4 sections. To start with, in the first section, we are going to do the configuration on ICE for TACACS. Then we'll move on to the F5 configuration. And after this, we will test the access in the third section. And in the fourth section, we'll see about troubleshooting. Before I get started, the basic configuration which I have used in my environment is the F5 management IP address. I have set it to 10.1.1.51. The ICE IP address, which is I'm going to use for authentication, is 10.1.1.1. And this is the TACACS secret key, which I'm going to set up on my ICE as well as F5. Let's get started. Before you start with the ICE configuration, the first major important aspect which you need to look at in your ICE is that you have enabled the device admin access service for TACACS on your ICE. So if you navigate to these options, you will get that specific feature. Let me show you a screenshot which I've taken from my ICE. So in here, the last option which you see, enable device admin service, this must be enabled on your ICE. After this, let's try to understand what are the steps which are involved on ICE. First step, you have to introduce F5 as a NAD component, network access device component, in your ICE, and make sure when you are adding F5 in your ICE configuration, the TACACS protocol is enabled. Then step 2, we're going to create a user identity group on ICE. If you are going to use the user accounts from your AD, no need to create any user groups on ICE. In my case, I'm trying to use local user accounts on my ICE, which I have created. So I'll be creating various groups, group of users. Maybe for admin, I'll create one. For guest users, I'll create another group. And within those groups, I will be creating multiple users. I'll create different users and assign them to the specific groups which I've created. Then the next requirement is to create a TACACS command set. This enables you to identify which command you can run in terms of ICE. And after this, the last step is the TACACS profile, which will be useful for F5 to provide you with attributes so that you can give different level of access two different set of users. So let's get going with all these 5 steps that we have seen and check how do we configure it on ISE. And yes, before we move ahead, after creating the TACACS profile, you also need to have an administration policy set, which will give F5 with the authorization details, the authorization attributes, so that F5 can give the specific role to different group of users. Let's get started with the ISE configuration. So my first step would be introducing F5 in my ISE configuration. Once you log in, I'll go to Work Center, Device Administration, and Network Resources. In here, I'll click on Add, give any name as per my requirement, and then I'll specify the management IP address of my F5. I'll disable this IPsec option. Then you need to expand this TACACS authentication settings. And here I will be setting the TACACS secret key, which I'm going to use in my F5 configuration as well. After this, I'll just click on submit. So now I have added my F5 as a network access device in my ISE configuration. The next part, I will be creating different groups of users. So I'll go to Work Center, User Identity Groups. These are the default groups which you can see are existing on ISE. If you click on Add, I'll give it a name as F5 Guest. Then I'll create another group for F5 Operators. Now, inside these two groups, I'm going to create some specific users and assign it to these groups. So I'll go to Work Center, Device Administration, and Identities. Now I'll click on Add. This will be my username. I'll re-enter the username, a password here. Then from this drop-down option, I'll see that this user can be mapped to a specific user group. So I will map this to my F5 guest group. You see the username that I've given is user1. User1 is a guest user, which I've added to F5 underscore guest group. Now I'll create one more user, user 2, set the password, and from the drop down I'll assign this to the admin group. Now my first step is done, which was addition of F5 in my ISE configuration. Next I created the groups, then I added the users in that group. Now I have to create TACACS profile. So if I go to work center, device administration, policy elements, and in here in the results section, you go to TACACS command set. Here I'm going to add command set for permit all. The name of the command set is permit all, and then I'm going to permit all the commands here. So I'll enable this option, then click on submit. After creating the command set, I'm going to create the TACACS profile. This is where we are going to specify the attributes. So let's say the TACACS profile for guest user is F5 guest, and then from this raw view section I have to specify the specific attribute. I'll specify the attribute as F5 LTM user 4-1, and then equal to, I'll give the group name. The group name which I created is F5 underscore guest. Then click submit. Similarly, I'm going to create one more TACACS profile. This is for admin, and in the raw view I'm going to provide the attribute F5-LTM user info1 equal to the group name. The group name is F5 underscore admin. Let me just re-verify the group names which I just created. If I go to user identity groups, okay, the F5 underscore guest is correct, but here it should be F5 underscore operators underscore admin. So I'll just edit. I'll go to policy elements. Edit. Click save. So now the next step would be After you create the command set and the profiles, you have to specify the admin policy sets to be used in authorization. So if I go to work center, you go to device administration and device admin policy sets. Now in here, you click on default. You will see a default authentication policy. This should work fine because it is going to use all ID stores, one of which is local as well. And then in terms of the authorization policy, we are going to add the command set that we just created. So by default, you'll see that it is showing as deny all shell. So just before this, I'm going to add a new rule. Say F5 guest rule. In here, I'm going to specify the condition selecting the user identity group. I'll select F5 guest. And in the command set, I will click on the drop down and select the permit all. And in the shell profile, I'll select F5 guest. Then click on done. Similarly, I have to create one more rule for my admin account. So I'll just click on insert new role above. F5 admin rule. From here, I'll mention the user identity groups. F5 operator. Then from the command set, I'll select permit all. And in the shell section, shell profile, I'll select this as F5 admin. Then done. Once you're done with this, click on save. So with this, your ISE configuration is ready. Now let's move on to the next section. So we have completed all the steps on ISE configuration. And now let's move on to the next section, which is F5 configuration for TACACS on F5. F5 configuration is even simpler if you compare it with ISE configuration, whatever we have done so far. The first step on F5 would be to introduce ISE as authentication server, and we enable the TACACS protocol. The second step would be to define the remote role groups that we have created in our ISE. We are just going to reference the same attributes in our F5 to define what access level has to be provided for a specific user. So with this, let's go ahead and do these steps. Okay, once you log into F5, you need to go to System, Users, and Authentication. By default, you will see that the authentication user directory is set to local, which means only locally user accounts will be able to access to the device. So now I'm going to change this from user directory. I'll select this to remote TACACS. Then once I select the TACACS, in here I have to add my ISE IP address, which I see is already added. And then from here, I will set the secret. This is the same secret key which I have set in my ISE. And the service name, I'll choose it as PPP, and the protocol name would be IP. Then I'll click on finish. Now, this completes our first step. The next step would be to create the different groups and assign them different privileges. So I'll go to remote role groups and create a group name, say F5 guest. This is the first group which I'm creating. I'll give the line order 1, and the attribute should be same as what you have set in your ISE. So I'll just type in F5 LTM user info1 equal to F5 underscore guest. And for this group of users, the access role which I am going to provide is guest. Finished. At present, I'm giving partition access for all partitions. If you want to restrict the partition access, you can do that as well by choosing the specific partition for which you want these group of users to have access to. Then similar to this, I will create one more group of user. This is the second group. And this attribute will be same as what I have set on my ISE. And from here, the assigned role will be the administrator. Then I'll click on finish. So with this, we are done with the configuration on F5. So with this, we have completed the 2 steps of our F5 configuration. Now let's get going to the next section. In here, we are going to test our access to F5 and see whether, based on the specific privileges that we have defined on F5, are going to work or not. So let's get going. So I'm back on my F5 screen. Since this specific session is already authenticated, let me open up a new session. And here I'll be using the different username and passwords which I created on my ISE account. In my guest group, I created a username as user1. I'll enter the credentials. I'm able to log in successfully, and I can see the role which is assigned to me is of guest. Now let me log out. And this time I'm going to try using username user2, which is part of my admin group. And after logging in, I can see that the role which I have been assigned is resource administrator. And this meets our need. Before we wind up this section, let's go ahead and check on the ISE, the authentication requests which were received with respect to these two users, username 1 and username 2. So on ISE, in order to check the logs, you have to go to operations, TACACS, and live logs. In here, you can see the attempts for username 1 and username 2, both for authentication and the authorization. Let's say if I click on username 1, I can see the TACACS authorization request received, and this was checked up in internal user, authentication passed, selected the shell profile, and this was given a authorization policy of F5 guest based on the specific shell that we have assigned to guest users. And similarly, if I check for user 2, I'll click on details. I can see the authentication passed. It was checked in internal users, and then the specific selected shell has been assigned. And this went through the authorization policy of under TACACS default F5 admin rule which we created. With this, we'll wind up this section. Now, let's move forward to the next section, which is troubleshooting. So most often we see we tend to do mistakes in our configurations, which in turn, or sometimes even if the configuration is right, some component, maybe it is the network, which is not letting you be successful in terms of achieving what you're trying to do. So let's see what are the steps that we need to take in case of when you're troubleshooting the F5 TACACS configuration. The first step always is to verify the configuration of both ends. First is your F5 and next is ISE. The next step would be to check the reachability from a network aspect. Is the TACACS server reachable? You can even review the log messages on F5 to understand what is it happening, what is it that is actually happening when you're trying to log in to the device. And as a last step, you can also perform packet captures to understand the communication which is happening between your F5 and your authentication server when you're trying to log in with a specific user account. So let's see how do we perform all these steps on F5. So one of the common mistakes that we end up doing when performing the TACACS configuration is a key mismatch. The secret key what you have set on your F5 is different from the key which is set on ISE. Let's see if we set the key as a wrong key. I'm changing this to a wrong key intentionally. Now, after changing it, Let's try accessing the device using our new account. Let me go to the browser. I'll log in with user 1. It will say that remote authentication server unreachable, local authentication failed. Let's see. Now, I find CLI very useful in terms of troubleshooting this. I'll be using tail command to view my logs when I'm logging in. So specifically when I am trying to see the log files, I will see here, it is saying error communicating with the server. I can even enable debug logs when I'm troubleshooting. So by default, it will show as error communicating with the server. The authentication server is unavailable. And then it is falling back to the local authentication. Let me try logging in again. Now this time you see, it is saying unable to obtain the username, user is unknown. Let's check on the ISE. What is it that we see? We can see the authentications failing. Let's click on this. So from here, you will clearly get the information as the invalid shared secret. The key which is matching, which is present in your ISE and which is on your F5 is not matching, because of which the authentication is failing. This is one of the common mistakes. Now let's change it back to the correct key. Now after changing the key to the correct key, let me try logging in again. I'm logged in successfully. Now after changing the key, let's say if I log out and this time I'm entering the correct username, but I'm entering the wrong password for this user. So it is not letting me through. It is saying login failed. Now let's check what is it that we see on ISE. So first time the username, after changing the secret key, I can see the username was authentication was successful. This was my last attempt. So let's go and check here. It is saying authentication failed. The user is found, but it is showing wrong password. Then you can also check this from CLI in terms of if I want to see the configuration of my TACACS from command line, I'll use tmsh. There are two ways to view it. I can view it from the bash shell itself, tmsh list auth TACACS servers. So it will show me the server IP address. I can check the network connectivity. It is reachable. I can, at times, between your F5 and your authentication server, there is a possibility of having firewall in between. So you can also check telnet. It's working fine. So I'll just come out of this. You can also see the configuration of whatever I have typed in here from the TMOS shell. In order to view it from TMOS shell, we just type in tmsh first, then the specific module. Then from here, I'll give the command. Since I want to see the configuration, I'll use list command and then TACACS servers. I'll get the same output what I got from my bash shell. These are just different ways of running your configuration. So even I can go inside my TACACS module and then I can type list servers. Now in order to come out of the module, I can type quit. With quit, I'll just come out directly into bash. Then I'll go back into tmsh. If let's say I want to view more in-depth logs with respect to TACACS, I can even enable the debug. To enable the debug, I'll go to modify TACACS all debug, and then if you click on tab, you'll get the possible options enabled or disabled. So I'll click on enabled. With this, debug log is enabled. Now after enabling this, you can do a tail for var log secure. This is my last instance 449. After this, let me try logging in again. This time I'm entering a wrong credential. Now let's go back to our F5. We can see here username not authenticated. This is for user 1. Let's say if I try to log in and this time I'm going to give the correct credential. You can see this is authenticated successfully. So this user is authenticated with the role of 700 and being assigned the access level of guest. If I want to stop this, I'll just use Control-C. Now, at times, I also have to take packet capture to understand the communication which is happening between your F5 and your authentication server. So I'll use TCP dump. Let me just log out first. TCP dump. I'll specify the interface with a filter either of the TACACS server you can use or the specific port which TACACS is using. So for me, I'm currently just using a filter of TACACS and then writing it to a specific file for which I can later view. I'm giving it a name as TACACS test, then entering this. So packet capture has already started. Now, if I try to log in using my account, I can see I'm authenticated successfully. Now let's go back. And in here, if I stop the capture, I will see there are 0 packets captured by this filter. The reason being, with by default for the TACACS communication, it is going to use the management interface. But here I have given the interface as 0.0. This represents all your TMM traffic handling interfaces, not the management interface. So now let me take one more capture, but here I will mention my management interface, which is ETH0, and this is for verbose. Then I'll start the capture. Now this time, let me log out again and log back in. I've successfully logged in. Now let's go back to the F5 command line, and I will see that 26 packets have been captured. This was for user 1 account. Now let me log out. This is my guest account. Let me log out from here. Now let's go and log in with user 2. This is my admin account, resource administrator I have got. Now let's go back. I can see 52 packets, 53 packets have been captured until now. So I'll just stop this. And now I have to take out this packet capture from F5. I can use WinSCP to get the packet capture file out for my further analysis. Okay, I have taken out the packet capture from F5. Let's have a look. So in here, I can see this is my F5 IP address and this is my authentication server. I can see 3-way handshake happening, and then at the end, authentication request also is going from F5 towards the authentication server. If I open up the details, I can see only just the versions, but I'm not able to find any more details about this request, this authentication request. I can see authentication is going, and then from the authentication server, I I have a response coming back, and then after a while I can see authorization request going from my F5 and then authorization response coming back. But if I click and expand the TACACS Plus packet, I'm not able to see more details with respect to what is the payload information, because this is encrypted communication. But if you have the key, you can decrypt. If you know the TACACS secret, you can decrypt this in specific packet information to see what is the communication happening between your F5 and your authentication server. So in Wireshark, how do you do that? You need to click on Edit, Preferences, and you go to Protocols. Then from here, you just search for TACACS, click on TACACS Plus, and here you will have an option of TACACS encryption key. You enter the TACACS encryption key, which we have used in our configuration. And after this, you click OK. The moment we click OK, we will be able to see if now I click on the authentication request and expand the TACACS packet, you can see the decrypted request which is going. This is the username password, user1. This is the password for that specific user. And then if I click on the response packet, I can see the decrypted reply, the authentication is passed. Similar to this, if I click on the next authorization request, which is going from my client, from F5 towards the authentication server, and if I expand this, the decrypted packet, I can see this is the specific authorization request which is going out. Let's check out the authorization response which came back. So this is the response. Now in the authorization response which is coming from my ISE to my F5, I can see the decrypted reply has the argument which we have set, the specific attribute which we have set in our ISE. And based on this attribute, F5 provides you the level of access, what we have defined on our F5. So this way you can analyze the packet captures and see where is the problem in terms of communicating between your F5 and your authentication server. With this, I'll conclude this specific topic. Thank you for watching. I hope this has been informative and useful for every one of you. Keep watching.